When I first made the plan to make a video about games, I seriously thought this was gonna be easy. I've enjoyed them all my life after all, and I think I'm pretty decent at analyzing them. Well, turns out, Black Skylands by developer Hungry Couch Games was the teacher that made me recognize my hubris. I'm not one to give up easily though, so I went ahead anyway. Perhaps the choice of a top-down shooter for my first video wasn't the smartest thing I ever did. Shooters in general aren't exactly my favorite genre. But I did, and so here I am, reviewing, or critiquing I guess, a now almost 2-year-old game. Although I don't think that the age of a game should matter much anymore. Creativity in video games is barely limited by technological barriers nowadays. The passage of time now only representing the passage from one trend to another. Despite, or maybe because of that, I do think that indie game developers will lead to a kind of second golden age in gaming over the coming years. At least according to the musings of the closest self-proclaimed video game historian to me, which would be me. The first golden age happened during the 90s and early 2000s. During that time, rapid improvements in computer hardware removed a lot of the creative shackles faced by the industry. It became a lot easier to transform your vision into actuality. The industry didn't yet have the opportunity to streamline and professionalize, which led to a magical time producing basically every genre we play today, as well as a ton of the most beloved IPs. I really don't think that it's controversial to say that making things more streamlined, more agreeable, and more efficient causes the intangible spark of creativity to kind of get lost somewhere along the way. Or I guess you could say, productivity and profit have purged most of the heart and soul from modern gaming. Yes, you could indeed say that, but it sounds easier than it is to say. Anyhow, we are now at a point in time where technology is again rapidly improving. Not only has software in general improved, but especially game engines and their tooling have become incredibly easy to use. Well, I say incredibly easy, what I mean is comparatively. I have dabbled in game development myself, and I can assure you that it's still not easy. But, and that is my point, you also don't need a computer science degree anymore. I want to clarify something before going into the analysis proper. What I say may seem overly critical at times, but I'm really giving the developer the benefit of the doubt here. I find it incredibly important to not leave critiquing this new wave of creative sparks to ill-thought-out online comments and rants. Creativity thrives on criticism, not on careless insult and dismissal. Also, if it's ever unclear whether I mean something to be snarky, sarcastic, sardonic, or, well, not, just assume it's funny. I cured myself of the malaise of cynicism and irony poisoning a while ago, and I don't plan on, wittingly or otherwise, infecting others with it. All these caveats out of the way, let us then look at Hungry Couch Games' debut work. The game's story follows Eva, who apparently rolled a natural 20 on all stats except charisma. It's a take it or leave it kind of affair. The story, I mean, who would ever leave all 20 die, really? Except for Eva, the writers didn't seem to have much luck on their rolls though. Up until close to the end, the story is pretty generic, albeit fun. Once near the conclusion though, the story takes some nonsensical turns into twists that feel really forced. With multiple almost endings that, at least to me, seem to be hastily scratched down and thrown in. Maybe to allow for some more gameplay ideas to be explored? I don't know, I am speculating here. The dialogue is very basic and could have used some proofreading at times. But overall it's functional and sometimes even funny already. If you don't want the plot and story spoiled, I'd advise you to skip to this timestamp. Oh, so you're still here? Then I guess I'll start by saying that I'm gonna massively condense about 80% of the game's story. It's just not interesting enough to talk about at length. I'll mostly focus on the third act, when the writer decided to just throw his typewriter off a cliff for some reason. In a way that's poetic, I suppose. There are a lot of cliffs in the Skylands you can fall off of very far down. Right after the story's prologue shows a very talented, willful and already very competent Eva, you see her arrive back in Aspia. She's just finished her officer training at the military academy and has now been sent on her first assignment to her home country. Aspia's marshal has stopped all communication, and Eva is supposed to find out why. Doesn't take long for Eva to realize that Aspia has been more or less taken over by pirates. The first attack she witnesses coincidentally also marks her first career advancement, as Aspia's current marshal dies in it, making her his replacement. Eva gets lured to an island by the pirate king in an attempt to recruit her into his ranks. She, being a morally upright citizen, of course refuses, thus starting a long struggle for Aspian liberation from the pirate's yoke. Eva and the Aspians decide on a plan to drive off the pirates. Aspia is still in possession of 2 massive old industry ships. They are going to refit those into warships and storm the pirates' fort. During the recovery of those ships, Eva finds out that the Swarm has been attacking more frequently lately. The Swarm is a biologically diverse race of somewhat insectoid-looking creatures that have spread across the Skylands. She also stumbles, and dissolves, upon a conspiracy between Aspia's disgruntled governor and the pirates themselves. Once the ships are recovered, Eva needs to recruit engineers to properly refit them. Recruitment turns into rescue-ment since said engineers have been kidnapped by the pirates. This rescue leads Eva to discover that the pirates are experimenting on Aspians, apparently turning them into swarm monsters. After refitting and properly armoring the ships, the Aspians start their assault on the pirate fort. They easily dispatch the pirate fleet, approach the pirate island and raise the pirate fort's walls, fighting their way through plenty of pirates to properly parley with the pirate king Kane personally. And so they do. Kane is dispatched, revealing that it wasn't him experimenting on the Aspians, but Ruth, one of the local genius doctors. This means that the threat to Aspia isn't over yet, and after interrogating Kane for Ruth's probable location, they head out to confront the Mad Doctor. Eva arrives at Ruth's secret laboratory, finding plenty of evidence of her monstrous experimentation. Reaching the heart of the compound, Eva defeats Ruth following an overly cliched villain monologue. Now, before continuing with the summary, I figure I have to put a disclaimer here. The developments that follow might just be oh so very misunderstood by me, or terribly put together by the author of the game's story, or even be lost in translation somewhere. Regardless of which of these is true, the rest of this tale is definitely from out of this world. This requires me to zoom into it quite a bit closer to really express the absurdity. Before leaving this world though, we'll have to leave the previous scene of Eva defeating Ruth, which we'll do by watching Eva walk into the back room of their battle arena. Here she finds her father, Richard, trapped in a cage. Once freed, he starts lampshading the unlikeliness of the success of Eva's endeavor so far. She's defeated armies of pirates with barely a scratch and managed to dispatch countless swarm monsters. No human could be this powerful, revealing that she indeed is what Ruth accused her of in their recent fight, part of the swarm. Apparently she hatched from an egg that had absorbed Richard's blood, making her a human-swarm hybrid. This wacky development culminates in Richard pointing a gun at her, threatening to kill her, pulling the trigger and dramatically missing her head. Yes, in retrospect you can see quite a few hints as to Eva's original origins, but only with that. Hindsight, as always, is 2020. From the clues throughout the story alone, you could probably puzzle together a picture of Eva not being quite right. Just not that Eva is an alien and that she hatched from an egg. I mean, seriously. If you played this game and saw this twist coming, I'm gonna call you a liar. So, after everyone, including me, gets over the twist, Eva returns to her base of operations. She and her team start preparations to celebrate their victory over the pirates and preventing Ruth's insane plan to turn the Aspians into swarm monsters. During the festivities, her father Richard arrives, warning them of an imminent swarm attack. The warning arrives too late, however, to really leave them much time to prepare. While they manage to fight off the swarm long enough for reinforcements to arrive, those reinforcements get annihilated almost instantly. This incredibly disproportionate sacrifice of a massive fleet as a minor diversion has bought them enough time though to allow Eva to head out and confront Horus, the overmind of the swarm himself. Since this is the finale, and this might be everyone's last time seeing each other, apologies and goodbyes are made. Richard is sorry for almost killing Eva, his daughter, and Peter, her assistant, tells her how awesome she is, that he doesn't care whether she's swarm or not. Humanity is a choice after all, and almost confesses his love for her. Eva then heads out to find Horus, encountering the cave that, unbeknownst to her, her father found that swarm egg in all those years ago. Here she gets telepathically contacted by Horus, who reveals to her that she is essentially his sister. He, of course, attempts to persuade her to his side, and, of course, fails to do so. Traversing further into swarm territory, she discovers Horus' massive body surrounded by a seemingly endless blanket of smaller swarm flyers. She magically knows that to be able to disperse all those flyers and to approach Horus, she'll need to destroy all the crystals on the surrounding islands. Before turning her attention to the task, Horus exposits a last few tidbits of information about the swarm. Nothing particularly surprising. Humans captured the swarm once it reached the planet, and then exploited them, likely for their swarmlet. He then explains that he plans on eradicating the rest of humanity. Now, that's obviously not something Eva can just let happen, so she decides to start powdering the solidified mineral residue. The crystals, you see, the crystals are... Anyway, she destroys the crystals, keeping up the organic shield of swarming monsters before she finally approaches her ultimate foe. A huge purplish-pink space baby. After besting her brother in brutal battle, he goes on to warn her of the consequences of his demise. Namely, that the islands will all fall. Now, excuse me if the following becomes even more confusing or flat out wrong, but the game doesn't do a good job of making sense of this part of the lore. Humans blew up the swarm's planet. The swarm then came to the humans' planet, which the foolishness and greed of the humans ultimately also destroyed, causing it to break into pieces. This in turn prompted Horus' forefather to use his power to keep all the islands up, creating the Skylands, and also creating a new Horus. Should Eva now decide to kill Horus, she will need to take his place so the swarm doesn't perish and the islands will stay afloat. As a last effort for a better solution, Eva asks Horus whether he would agree to keep the swarm away from the humans if she let him live. Horus declines, arguing that that is not what the swarm is. The swarm will spread, it will consume, and it is ultimately incompatible with humanity. That leaves Eva with no other choice but to kill Horus and take his place. Once she has taken over, Eva literally just makes the swarm retreat and exists peacefully away from humans. Absolutely baffling. The author basically just says to the idea of the swarm's nature being what it is, fuck it, if a pretty enough girl comes along, reality will bend to match her will. Well, granted that is closer to reality than most would like to admit, but it's not good writing. I'm not gonna comment much on the epilogue, it's there. It feels like it's there just because it has to be there. Moving on to what makes a game and not a movie or a book. Black Skylands gameplay is divided into two main parts: exploration and exploitation on foot, and navigation and naval or I guess skyval combat on ships. As ever, you jump or hook your way onto and across islands for missions and the gathering of resources. Resources like weapon mods and talismans, as well as 5 kinds of currency and building materials to upgrade your base. To be able to upgrade your weapons and your ship, you first need to upgrade the buildings in your home base, the father ship. You will frequently return to this base to progress the story, unlock weapon mod and talisman boxes, upgrade your abilities, and invest the aforementioned building resources. Don't expect any in-depth base building mechanics or any sort of economics though. It's a very simple, 3-tiered, buy once and you're good gating mechanic to your upgrades. Combat on foot feels satisfying enough and can be a lot of fun. The game offers you a pretty standard selection of personal weapons, starting you with a pistol and quickly granting you access to shotguns, rifles, automatic and some more seemingly exotic weapons. Alas, these weapons often feel kind of ineffectual. Time to kill often seems too long. Not because enemies appear to have too much health, but because these weapons are lacking punch. The frequent need to reload makes them feel inadequate and often disrupts the arcadey flow of combat. Abilities, comparatively, are so much more effective and fun. They make it much easier to backstab enemies with the knife, the by far most damaging regular attack I encountered, especially when you factor in its attack rate and lack of reload requirement. In fact, once I obtained the time slowing power, coupled it with the stun lightning and equipped cooldown lowering talismans, I could use them in combination for basically every other battle and make half of the combat encounters absolutely trivial. Since I just mentioned talismans, I might as well go over them now. They can be plugged into 4 equipment slots and are essentially passive abilities. They range from higher critical hit chance when you are at low health, more damage to full health enemies, or cooldown reduction on kills. All in all, they work and feel fine, no complaints here. Where those come in, complaints that is, are the weapon mods. They do what they promise, but what they promise isn't exactly adventure. A safe and stable outcome is what you'll find here, no surprises. Nothing but number tweaks. Magazine size, fire range, reload speed, damage and critical hit chance. That's it. Weapon upgrades serve as a neglected step sibling to mods. They are superfluous for progression. Essentially just a resource dump you didn't really want. A mandatory chore that, should you not attend to it, would make your life harder than just doing the thing. A spot to invest the weapon steel in that is necessary to not make combat feel tedious. While you can buy weapon mods with the same resources, I never bothered grinding for that purpose. I simply upgraded my main weapons as soon as I could, and that was that. It never felt like I should buy mods, given how little of their improvement reflects an actual game feel. And ultimately, I don't think the game needed another bar to fill. Had they scrapped weapon upgrades entirely, and had they changed weapon mods to resemble the more creative spirit of the talismans, I think the combination may have provided quite a few intriguing ways to conquer the land masses. This is just one wasted opportunity of a few that could have made the game a lot more engaging, making me silently weep for the R's, Yars and yo-hos that may have been rolled, shouted and sung. Healing is accomplished via use of medkits that can be gathered from certain plants, are dropped by enemies, or refilled at supply stations. You can only hold one at a time, which is rarely an issue though. Once you've used your medkit, seemingly every other enemy drops a refill. This is sometimes used in boss battles too, to allow you more opportunities to recover from your mistakes. But that kind of defeats the point of having them as luggable items, given their virtually limitless supply. Ammo for your weapons is either found in destroyable crates or dropped by enemies, with a higher drop chance when using a knife for the killing blow. On enemies that is, I don't think boxes are alive in this game. Alternatively, the same supply stations that refill your medkits also refill all your ammo. Now onto the things that consume your ammo. Weapons. Pistols deal low damage, have small magazine sizes and cannot be modded. Nothing too out of the ordinary for a fallback weapon. It became useless the instant I found the third gun anyway. Never did I have to fall back on it, because I never actually ran out of ammo for my other guns. Which is a shame, because I usually like having to rely on my default weapon every now and then. Kinda drives home the point that ammo management is actually required, giving it a more urgent feel. The two types of rifles, sniper and not sniper, are a mixed bag. Sniper rifles on one hand, well, but actually two, way too big otherwise, have quite some use. Dealing high damage and a guaranteed critical hit when aiming, well, meaning having your weapon spread indicator at a minimum. Regular rifles, on the other two hands, deal incredibly underwhelming damage, which I suppose is meant to compensate for their ability to shoot through enemies. Which it doesn't, at all. No matter how much I pleaded with them, enemies refuse to line up for that to matter. Not really surprising, since the amount of enemies you're fighting at once isn't especially high most of the time. Automatic weapons come in mainly two kinds, SMGs and assault rifles. To be frank, I haven't played around a lot with SMGs since I found ARs to be superior in most ways, at least for my liking. While assault rifles hold less bullets per magazine and their rate of fire is lower, they also do more damage, shoot further and have less spread. So again, I haven't found a compelling reason to use SMGs. Lastly onto shotguns, my favorite weapons in most games, including Black Skylands. To me, they were the only weapon that felt right and rather well balanced. They have limited overall and per magazine ammo capacity, which I figure is to stop them from being overpowered. Fair enough. They were the weapon that made the game the most fun to me and, barring some exceptions, are universally useful. To allow you to raise your trigger finger to your temple every once in a while, you'll find the occasional puzzle on most islands. They are probably not gonna make you lower that finger to find something it could trigger next to the temple it just abandoned, but they are nonetheless a welcome change of pace. The most common puzzles are all hurdles towards more resources, mostly ability crystals. A resource which is exclusively obtained via this method. The simplest puzzle requires you to put weights into the correct order. Another expects you to rotate discs into positions to show the shapes displayed next to them, which, over time, will be made slightly more complicated by obstructing some of the symbols on the discs. Less common are math word problems, requiring you to play around with numbers to resolve 3-digit log combinations. Lastly, there's a memory exercise where you have to correctly repeat a pattern you are shown. Basically, Simon Says. There are other, much less frequent puzzles here and there, but nothing especially difficult or noteworthy. Ever's movement consists mostly of walking and some basic platforming with the help of her grappling hook and rolls. These sections aren't difficult or time-consuming, and fine as they are. The game's missions consist of the usual primary story and side missions, both of which just serve as elaborate waypoints. Rarely do they provide win conditions apart from kill everything, go here, or deliver this item there. And apart from the game's raid mode, I haven't seen any lose conditions. Side missions do at times unlock new weapons, some of them even provide some lore and world building. For the most part, they just provide resources though, which you are rarely in need of. There really isn't much to say about missions apart from that. They exist and they work, and in the case of primary ones, eventually lead you to the next boss battle. Boss battles are out of the ordinary encounters, some of them well designed, others not realizing the concept's potential, and one or two basically just being a damage rush. I did enjoy most of these. What ground combat is concerned, they can actually be comparatively challenging. Their design is akin to a more old school approach. Rather than being checks for your equipment, they are more about learning the boss's patterns, how to avoid them, and how to find gaps or ways to retaliate. They can of course be made a lot easier by grinding resources and mods for your weapons, but I haven't really found the need to do that for any of them. Even the more difficult fights only took a handful of tries to beat. Perhaps higher difficulties provide more of a reason to go out of your way to upgrade your equipment. Boss battles are overall another aspect that, given more attention, could have made this game a lot better than it is. The design wheels are there, the prioritization just wasn't applied properly. Onto the unique selling point of this game, skyfaring and battle. In their best moments, both of them are incredibly fun. Until you acquire enough upgrades, it always felt to me like I'm controlling something big and unwieldy, with the appropriate amount of inertia. Missing the deceleration mass that water would provide, the air feels appropriately weightless. Alas, way too much potential is wasted here. By never really giving you enough time or reason to engage with this part of the game, it feels unfinished. Glimpses of what could be regularly remind you of what isn't. Had they put more content, balancing and polish into this part of the game, my overall opinion of it would, again, be far better. The way it is, however, air combat is often simply tedious. Encounters are rarely difficult, and when they aren't so due to clever behavior of enemies or challenging mechanics, but rather due to sheer numerical force. Repairing in combat is difficult, as it should be, but also annoying, as it should not. Since the repair button is the same as the use button, you frequently open your ship's cargo hold instead of hammering that hole on deck next to it. Or grab onto the helm again after just letting go, preventing you from preserving something the wheel could actually steer. You also rarely travel more than a few seconds in a given direction, depriving you of the feeling of an actual journey. Fast travel points are numerous, reducing your time even further. There's hardly a need to navigate, as in finding your way around, since your map always points you in the right direction. There's no sense of adventure here, but it always feels like it's going to appear just after that next turn. But it never does. Ship weapon upgrades have the same problems as gun upgrades. They seem superfluous, just a way to dump your resources. Navigation upgrades on the other hand feel worthwhile and fun. You do notice faster acceleration and maximum speed, but especially improvements to handling, once high enough, give your vessel the feeling of being distinct, a craft not just anyone in this world would have. Side content on the airways is decent enough. There are fishing points that require you to complete a directional input minigame in order to reel in flying fish, I suppose. You can then turn these in for weapon mods. You also encounter maroon ships, whose captains are either in need of repair or fuel. These apparently randomly generated souls will thank you in either ship or weapon steel or base building resources, in high and medium amounts respectively. There's only one mandatory boss fight in the skies, and it's a tough one, at least if you lack the upgrades or appropriate choice of ship. It's also a fight that bugged out on me, making it somewhat frustrating. I'll have more to say on that later. Before later though, I'll tackle the topic of the team of the developers titillating one's sensory organs. Visuals and sound. I'm gonna talk about the game's visuals and sound now. The game has really good pixel art that can occasionally look great, impressive even. Character portraits are all pretty high quality and give characters a lot more distinctiveness. User interface and inventory item art is very well done. All icons look like the thing they're supposed to represent, are visually distinct and clearly readable. Art for items and interactables clearly contrasts with the backgrounds and level geometry. Some of the backgrounds feature massive flying beasts that make you wonder about the world hidden underneath all the floating rocks. How did these creatures emerge, and how did humans manage to survive in this kind of environment? There's also a lot of detail, more incidental art like the islands themselves. Plants, trees and buildings are at times drawn with so much apparent love and playfulness that it's a pity you rarely get a chance to look at it all unless you deliberately take the time. During combat and exploration, the gameplay is much too fast and hectic to really take in the details. Black Skylands sound is good overall. Weapons sound punchy or precise enough. Enemies sound alright, and ship sounds are unobtrusive, except when they need to be, like being low on fuel or when your ship is about to fall apart. Music is fine, though mostly of the yes it's there variety. The track that plays during your stays on the father ship is the only one that really stuck out to me. It's the proper amount of serene and hopeful to give you the feeling of a safe haven. I feel like whoever composed the music could have done a lot more with the other tracks. The talent seems to be there, at least. Talent that also seemed to be present in the game's programmers. What few bugs there seem to be, I'd actually call quirks. Almost nothing annoying or game-breaking, mostly just odd or curious to see. Almost, because I encountered one aggravating bug towards the end of the game and another actual game-breaking one. The latter occurred in a separate, optional game mode, making it less of a problem. But the former occurs while fighting a massive swarm monster with your ship during one of the primary missions. Should you perish during this encounter, you get reset to the most recent autosave point, as per usual. However, the additional monsters spawned during the fight will not despawn and make every subsequent attempt that much more difficult. Considering this is one of the harder boss fights of the game, that's quite unfortunate. Is what a word would say, understating buggers. Since I ain't one, I'm gonna call it what it is. Fucking infuriating. One of the few moments during gameplay where I got to exercise those cursing reflexes. But this analysis is supposed to be reflective, not reflexive. So, while you can clear the spawned beasts by moving far enough away from the arena, the surrounding airspace is crawling with fluttering fiends that would like nothing better than to feast on your flying frigate. Fast travel away is another possibility of clearing the bug, but there are no fast travel points within the greater area surrounding the creature's cove, leaving you no choice but to travel through the aforementioned region heaped with hungry horrors. The second bug I encountered was an actual showstopper, which prevented me from continuing my first raid mission. My goal was to free a ship from infection, which I was supposed to accomplish via firepower. The last creature refused to die though, preferring to phase right through my projectiles rather than do the honorable thing and perish. Moving far enough away to make the thing despawn didn't help, alas, as the trigger to advance the mission would just not trigger. I'll now move far enough away from technical issues to advance this video to its next section. Oh, I'm so proud of this segue. As opposed to a lot of modern titles, game features in Black Skylands are not introduced piecemeal or barricaded behind a pseudo-progression system. Within 1 hour you see most of what the game has to offer in terms of gameplay. This is a much appreciated approach to game design that isn't without its caveats though. The reason, in my eyes, why a lot of modern games lock so many of the mechanics from quick or instant access is unlikely to be that that's how the game was envisioned. I also don't buy that progression systems are expected to be there by anyone but marketing people. What I do buy is that gamers wouldn't like most titles without one of those systems. But I doubt the reason for that is an actual preference for the delayed but still inevitable introduction of new features. Rather, the reason might just be that most games would immediately show how boring their core gameplay actually is. The player tricks themselves into believing that just that one more ability is gonna make the game fun instead of it seeming fun. By thankfully foregoing what I think to be essentially player deception, Black Skylands showed me pretty early on whether it and I could become an item. If it hadn't been for this video, we would have likely gone separate ways, for each of us to find something better suited. No hard feelings, sugar. You can see a ton of potential in multiple aspects of the game, but potential is not what you're gonna play. I suspect that Huge Couch Games bit off more than they could chew with this project. To their massive credit, they realized that and cut back on features sometime during development. Apparently, the game used to have a gun crafting and ship module system during early access, which was removed before release due to time constraints. Judging by the Steam forums, those features were highly anticipated, at least by some, and as per usual for online forums, they cried bloody murder as to the injustice of their removal. From where I am standing, however, they should have been more rigorous, removed even more to concentrate on the many good seeds they had and just had to properly nurse to bloom. Case in point being, the game's so-called raid mode, which I only mentioned in passing during the review. It consists of randomly assembled pieces of gameplay in an apparent parallel universe only populated by the swarm and helpless humans. It's unlocked late into the game and allows you to unlock 4 more swarm weapons. I only completed this mode thrice, and only completed it once. The first attempt bugged out on me and made it unfinishable. The second try ended rather abruptly after a flying swarm monster obliterated my skyship. The third attempt somehow succeeded, though more out of dumb luck than skill, to be honest. Still, I only played this entire extra mode for the sake of this video, and it did not change my opinion of the game whatsoever. Yes, it's additional content, but I'd rather have seen it cut like some other planned features, and the time invested in it used somewhere else. That is not to say that Black Skylands is a bad game. If you like shooters, you'll likely be able to find some fun here. It's a good first attempt and seems to have sold well enough to allow developer Hungry Couch Games to develop a new game called Drillcore, which recently went from early access into version 1.0. Awesome.